So the big X factor obviously is like, does it matter that there's a human on the other side?
Does it?
So we have a lot of early evidence to show that it doesn't matter. We have, we can get approximately the same outcomes.
Did you hear that? That was literally my therapist, like somewhere dropping out of her chair and wanting to be on yelling at you for that.
I'm sure.
I'm Laurie Segall, and you're listening to Mostly Human, a tech podcast through a human lens. Thanks for being here, Neil. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I'm excited to be here.
Well, first of all, we are going to talk about AI and we're going to talk about mental health, but I want to first talk about mattresses. I just thought we'd start at mattresses because this is the second act of this really incredible career you've had.
Yeah.
But the first act and how I met you, because I was covering startups and you were a little startup back in the day called Casper.
Yeah.
Can you tell folks, if they don't know what Casper is? And I promise we will not spend this whole time on Casper.
No, happy to. So at Casper, we were trying to build a sleep brand that changed the way people think about sleep. It started with a direct-to-consumer mattress, and then we launched lots of other products like pillows and sheets and eventually smart home products like lights. It started partly because my dad was a sleep doctor. I've been talking about these kinds of things for a long time with him. I had many friends that were thinking about this. And so we had this vision that if we could make products and services that actually make it cool, that people might actually want to invest into their sleep.
And I love that your dad's like a sleep doctor. You come from a family of doctors. You dropped out of med school, is that?
Yes.
I'm sure what did your parents say when you dropped out of med school to say, I'm going to go build a mattress company?
It was a rough experience. And the thing is, I'm never going to live it down. The day of our IPO, my mom told me, she was like, so you're going to go back to medical school now, right? It's a dark moment for me.
I mean, it's like parents, but they make us who we are, and we are, forever grateful. And so let's talk about the IPO. So you build out this company. IPO happens 2020. We're in the pandemic.
Yeah.
And I remember that time so well. Like, this is before I was married with a baby, and I had actually left my job at CNN because I wanted to build out my own thing. And I just remember going back to those days, how lonely and horrible and scary everything felt.
Yeah.
And from a mental health perspective, I mean, not to get too personal like early on, but like I don't think I was I don't know who was okay, but I think like I really struggled during that time with my mental health, and I didn't have a public company or that pressure. So I imagine for you at that time, mental health wise, it must have been tough.
It was tough for many reasons. One of which was, I think, the aloneness. Like, I'm definitely one of those people that thrives around people in person. I think there was also an element of trying to figure out how do you navigate both the personal and professional chaos at the same time. Like, I've heard Brian Chesky talking a lot about this, where, you're trying to figure out, am I safe? Is my family safe? My dad is a pulmonologist and CCU doctor who's working with primarily COVID patients. My sister was a first-year emergency medicine resident who was like in the front lines. And so every day we're getting reports of the crazy things that are happening. And, I'm worrying like, are they going to come home or be okay? Because at that point we had no line of sight into treatments really. And simultaneously trying to figure out, how do I make sure that all of our team's okay? Our factories are shutting down. We actually have to get them back online. What do we do? And so, it was definitely a trying moment.
In what sense? Like I look back at that period for me and just, my mom had sepsis months before and almost died. And I was so terrified. I couldn't go home and take care of her because I'm scared if I hug her, I could kill her. Like this was COVID 2020.
Yeah.
Like I think like really we had like a mental health crisis happening, right? I remember the ambulances outside all the time, the sirens. I think that from a mental health perspective, it struck a real chord with me. And I wonder with you, I think you said you've been open about like mental health.
Yeah.
Was it depression? Do you think you had anxiety? What was it, I think, at that time that really impacted you?
Probably some mix of all the above, to be honest.
Yeah.
I think there has always been a sense for me that I've struggled from growing up as a kid. My parents got divorced when I was young. I live with my mom. There's definitely a sense of being out of place, I think, for a long time. I think in college I struggled. And the thing is, I never had the vocabulary for it because in my family, we never talked about mental health. Like coming from, an immigrant family, there is very much sometimes an attitude of the glorification of pain because we made it here through all kinds of difficult things. And so it's very easy to hide sometimes in the like, just push yourself as much as possible. And like the pain is normal. What ended up happening is during my mid years at Casper, I was really struggling. My friend Lucy had recommended that I go see a therapist. And I remember having that reaction around like, what a funny thing to say to somebody. Like, we're just going for a walk and you're telling me I should go to therapy. But she recommended somebody. And I had a very like a remarkable experience of kind of like exploring and trying to understand like who I am and like why sometimes I feel the ways that I do. And it started this like many years long process of trying to understand that, which then morphed into helping many other founders who are having mental health problems talk about it. And so it was like, it happened like slowly and then all at once.
You describe your own mental health journey as being able to see color for the first time.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
I think that sometimes if I look back on my life, it felt very like unidimensional to some extent. And what I mean is if I try to make sense of it looking backwards, it's often comes from a place of like blame, shame, anger, guilt. I would say a lot of like negative emotions that are kind of getting often repressed internally. And I think when you have the language to understand what's actually happening, why it's happening, who you want to be, and also have like the tools to figure out how to get there, it ends up being really powerful because it feels like you have so much agency. Like you have control over your own life and the process and where you want to go. And to me, that's like cracking open a door to a whole other world. Because I think a lot of the way when I've talked to so many people, sometimes I definitely think people have the like, how long is this normal?
I remember when I went to really good therapy for the first time. Thankfully for you, my therapist was unavailable to join this conversation today. So you're off the hook. But I just remember feeling like, it's like I was like red pilled for the first time. I saw things like from a different, it's like the kaleidoscope had turned just a little bit.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, all these narratives that I had about like my childhood, about things that I felt like I was, and it, by the way, it's not just like, oh, and now you're great. Like good days, bad days. But it was just really like understanding in a much more textured way the reason why I am the way I am, the reason why relationships are going the way they are. And it was so powerful, which is why I'm excited, to be here talking about what you're building next, because you essentially are going from helping the world sleep better to wanting the world to feel better. How do you walk me through the process of how you go from mattresses, direct-to-consumer mattresses, and building this kind of cool brand beginning around 2014, 2015, to building chatbots for mental health?
Yeah. I love that whole thing about how things only make sense in reverse, because this is not what I would have predicted. Although I think people who know me, it would make total sense, because they were like, you've been talking about mental health for 10 years. Yeah. So like I said, mid-Casper journey, I start going to therapy. I have a profound experience, but I realize like I want to do more. So I go to the Hoffman process, and so much of the world makes sense to me because I'm like, oh, some part of who I am are these patterns that I've learned, that I've inherited from my parents. And that not only is that important to know, but I can both accept that and also change them if I want to. Yeah. Okay, so that's a helpful thing as I start kind of like working through stuff. Around that time period, I met Patrick Kennedy, the congressman, who had started a company with Marjorie Morrison called Psych Hub. So they invited me to join the board of their company because they wanted to build it into a consumer brand and actually get consumers excited about it. So that was kind of like my first entry point into spending a lot of time into the mental health world. I stepped more and more into this world over time. Finally, when I left Casper, I was trying to figure out what to work on next. And it was one of those ideas that had kept bothering me at night. I'd always assumed that somebody was going to build AI therapy because it's the most obvious idea in the world. Like, we didn't think of this. Like, ELIZA was one of the first examples of it. Mm-hmm. So ELIZA was one of the first computer programs that was built, kind of considered to be one of the first AI programs. And actually what it was used for was as an AI therapist. People have tried many different variants of this over time. And so I became obsessed with it, and I was like, there has to be somebody building this. Like, let me just go find the company and invest into it because I'm deeply interested in mental health. So I started meeting computational psychiatrists around the world, trying to figure out what approaches are going to make sense. A lot of this, to be honest, was inspired by ChatGPT. When I first saw it come out, it was still using GPT 3.5, and I realized like, oh, that makes total sense. Like maybe we're finally at the moment where we can have these intelligent models. Clearly, self-learning is going to become a thing. maybe we could build models that can learn from how traditional therapists operate, but then bring it into an AI world. I didn't know how to do any of this, obviously, but what I am good at is like trying to find people who are good at these things. And so, yeah, met a bunch of different computational psychiatrists, realized that nobody was really taking a large scale approach to, I think, trying to do this the right way. Partly because there was like a lot of academics working on this in building toy models, but that our intuition was that to do this right, you would need to build large scale data sets, really be able to test it out in the wild, build a world-class machine learning team. And, by chance, I met my co-founder, Daniel, who's an incredible machine learning engineer, AI researcher. He'd actually been working in the AI crisis space. And Daniel and I met, and we like instantly clicked. I mean, we had met on like a Sunday or Saturday. We went for a walk around Union Square. We immediately hit a whiteboard, started drawing what happened, and then basically started working together the next day.
As we get into kind of what it is and what it is that you're building, we have to look at the backdrop.
Yeah.
And I remember having this, playing with this chatbot. It was on Replica, and seeing like, could I be in a relationship, but like just as part of not for my personal use, I should just say that, but as part of a story, being like, could I have an emotional connection with a chatbot? And the answer for me back then was like, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So it is not shocking to me, but I think it is shocking at this moment. If you look back at like 2025, there's a Harvard Business Review study that looked at people who were talking in open spaces. So take that with a grain of salt. They're talking probably on Reddit and these open forums. And they found that therapy and companionship was the top use mentioned for AI, which is pretty astounding that like people are really using artificial intelligence for companionship, but also for self-help, for mental health, and for therapy. Why is that?
I think a lot of people are hurting, for one, on the inside. And that could be various levels of it, right? It can range from pinches, small things that are going on, into really big things like I've never come out to somebody, to my family, or I have been having an affair. I don't know, pick any number of topics that are really difficult perhaps for people to talk about. People have this innate desire to want to be seen, to be validated, to understand if their experience is normal, to want to get that help. We see that therapy is at an all-time high. Like between last year and this year, employers and payers have said that behavioral health expense has gone up 40% year over year. What does that mean? That means that like people clearly want access to these kinds of services at unprecedented rates. And I don't know, I think there's something that's like a part of our core human psyche in terms of wanting to be taken care of. And like part of the reason it makes sense to me is like we've had these kinds of relationships forever. Like even a lot of therapy, what is it based on? There are lots of principles. If you look at ACT, it's based on many Buddhist principles that are thousands of years old, right? We didn't just invent them in the last 30 years. We packaged them in different ways. But this idea of having a priest, rabbi, somebody who takes care of us, somebody who helps us figure it out, like that's an idea that's as old as time.
We were having a conversation with an MIT researcher the other day who was like, and we're joking that it was almost like a meet cute where people will like start using ChatGPT, but with this idea that people use it for productivity, but they start using it for mental health, they start using it for all these different things. Part of that is likely how these programs are designed, which I think is important to talk about as we talk about how you're designing Ash. Why do you think people are feeling that intimacy from a product perspective with apps like ChatGPT, with apps like Claude?
Yeah. For one, I think we're just starting to understand what these parasocial relationships look like. And what's hard to understand is, I ask myself this intellectual question all the time. It's like, what will be so weird for us in 20 years when our kids are thinking about, getting married or finding a partner that we could not possibly imagine? And like, I think the question we'll be asking is like, will it be normal to get married to AI, right? And the thing is that I actually think that in 30 years or 50 years, there may be a desire for people to say, hey, actually, I have this relationship that's really important to me, and I want the same rights for them as I do for myself.
And you really think that? Like, because I know I remember sitting at a table with a woman engaged to a robot, because as one does in my life, and thinking like, is this going to happen? Like, is this real as robots feel more human, as AI feels more human?
Yeah.
Is there that world where things that we as like parents are like, no way that could happen?
I don't know. I'm not rooting for that world. To be clear, like I want a world in which it's much more pro-human, right? I want a world in which people have much deeper relationships with each other and those friendships and stuff. But I think we have to accept that we don't understand what the societal norms are going to evolve into, and that they have changed every 20 or 30 years. And so like, as the Overton window shifts, like, of course it's going to be different, right? So now you imagine, how have most people formed relationships, and why is it difficult today? Often through work. Most people actually do, a lot of people do find their partners at work. Well, when you're at work and now the number one person you talk to all day long is ChatGPT or Claude instead of your coworkers, well, like, there's going to be some sort of a parasocial relationship that forms there.
And parasocial being, for folks who don't know what parasocial means. So it's like, I'm a huge fan of Paris Hilton, but I almost feel like I know her.
Yes.
Like, I feel like we are friends almost to some degree. It's like you develop these real emotional feelings for an online figure, whether that's a chatbot or a person.
Right. And then it's an interesting question of like, are we really talking about parasocial here, or is it,
something completely
or is it something else?
new?
The question is, okay, are these systems being designed to put us into those kinds of relationships or not? And I think that's an open question, right?
Yeah.
Depending on which service you're using. If you're talking to an erotic role play chatbot that is actually trying to create a relationship with you, and where the nature of your conversation is deeply emotional, sometimes sexual, sometimes deeply intimate, and about knowing each other, then I can imagine a world in which it goes more in that direction.
And I promise we're going to start talking about Ash, but I think this is really good setup for it. Like, the thing I think about sitting in squarely in the human world, like I am, my feature and my flaw as I am human, like for better and for worse, but knowing the product language of Silicon Valley and knowing what certain things mean or how certain products are developed, I think it gives me the ability to be like, well, of course that went wrong. Like, what could go wrong? So let's look at this through the lens of therapy. ChatGPT I use all the time. But it's important to say that these models are prone to be affirmative. Why is that? Engagement, right?
Yeah. Well, it's what people want, right? It's when we talk about reinforcement learning from human feedback, RLHF, that is literally what they've done is essentially like, when you go into ChatGPT and you see two options and they ask you which one do you like better, and when they run that experiment hundreds of millions of times, they create models that appease humans or do the things that humans want, right? That's why they'll never push back on you, because humans never pick the response that's like the worst response for you.
Right. Let's put this in human language, right? Like, okay, I'm interviewing you and you're like, Laurie, that is such an amazing question. All of a sudden I'm like, wow, he sees me. Like, and it sounds stupid, right? But I just say it like, I'm like, oh, that's validating. It's validating of who I am and how I see myself. And so all of a sudden you have these AI chatbots that begin to affirm you and see you. And as human beings, like, what do we want?
We want to be seen.
We just want to be seen.
And sometimes it's good. The thing is that, like, in real relationships, seeing each other is really important, right? Helping one feel like we're doing active listening, like I'm actually understanding what you're saying deeply, is an important component. The problem is that when it goes completely unchecked and it goes on for a long period of time, and to some extent, I use the word insidious lightly here. I'm not saying it's necessarily by design that they're trying to addict people, but you can imagine a world in which when you create these systems that over long periods of time are entraining themselves into your memory and whatnot, and all of a sudden you start thinking like, yeah, actually, I am right all the time, right? It turns you into a different person because you're getting this continuous feedback that you're right.
It used to be just like these one-off and everyone's freaking out about it. But now it's like you're hearing these stories once a week, once every couple of weeks, like AI psychosis, people beginning to think that they've found the cure to some crazy thing in this AI chatbot that's just affirming, going with them, keep going, keep going. Young people who are ending their lives after, having these conversations with these chatbots. And so someone said something that I actually thought was great. It was a psychiatrist who said generative models are prone to psychophancy. They mirror language, validate tone, and avoid contradiction. This is a feature in traditional large language models, but it's a flaw in therapy. Do you think it's okay for people to get therapy using ChatGPT for therapy?
I don't think we have a choice. I think the reality is the genie's out of the bottle. Like, whether or not we care about whether it should happen or not, people are doing it. They're turning to these solutions for it. I also think the therapy is such a complicated term because it means so many different things, right? We've talked to a lot of young people. I'd say young as in like 18 to 24-year-olds. And when I talk to them about how they're using ChatGPT for therapy, what they often tell us is they're using it to analyze social relationships. So their version of AI therapy is, I went to this party, this guy said this thing, or this guy sent me this message. What do you think he really means by that, right? That's actually not what we would do in traditional therapy. Like I don't bring my phone into my therapist's office and say, hey, can you analyze this relationship? But that's their conception of what AI therapy is. They're actually not using it to process emotions and feelings because at least from the people I've talked to, they wouldn't trust AI today to be able, or at least ChatGPT to like do the deep work of messing with their feelings.
Yeah.
So I think part of what's hard here is that like, I don't think we really even have the vocabulary yet to figure out like, what are we even talking about? Because it is this like very broad space that ranges between understanding relationships, processing emotions, trying to figure out how to interact better in the world and improve my relationships. And then also there's this like last bit around like, what does my relationship with AI look like?
Right. And so this is why you built out Ash, right? Yeah. You saw so many people, like we talk about the problem, so many people are using AI to feel better or to try to feel better or find a solution or take care of their mental health. And that's kind of like at the premise of why you're building what you're building. So how is Ash different than other traditional models like ChatGPT, like Claude? And what are you hoping to accomplish with it?
So Ash is a consumer app. You can use it to do what I would say loosely as AI therapy, although we don't call it that, which is what I mean is talk about the emotions that you're going through, talk about your day, try to figure out with everyday issues that are bugging you that can range from things that are deeply meaningful, but perhaps not clinical, let's say. And so it was born out of this hypothesis that when we look at the mental health curves, the demand for the amount of help that people want is off the charts. And yet serious mental illness is relatively flat. And so the increased demand is clearly coming from all of these like everyday issues that people are having, right? Whether it's stress, anxiety, relationships. In the future, it's going to be like, how am I navigating this AI transition because people's jobs are being lost and are changing? And so we built it because we were like, there has to be some sort of a different tool for this era, but ideally inspired by what's worked in the past, right? Like there's no reason we should start from scratch when we actually have not only thousands of years of people having practiced this, but also in actual therapy, we have people that have actually practiced and learned about how, how the human to human interaction works and how to improve it and how to help people process and stuff. And so we wanted to design a system that was actually specifically designed for this purpose, that does things very differently. So for example, when it comes to validation, that actually considers that we shouldn't just validate you all the time. One of the core things in therapy is actually pushing back on you and challenging your assumptions. Not all the time, because that would be a terrible experience, but sometimes, right? And how do you design a system that knows when is the appropriate time to do that? Do we actually have enough rapport in this very moment to do it yet? If I challenge you immediately 2 minutes into meeting you, you're going to go like, who the fuck are you to do that? Maybe it makes sense after we've talked for a few hours and we know each other. And so
it's like doing an interview. I save all my hard questions for the end.
Yes.
Good luck. I'm just
coming soon.
Right, coming soon. No, but it's really true. How do you design a product for that?
At the beginning, it was a lot of trying to figure out what can we pull and be inspired from traditional therapy. And we had this thought that like a lot of times if you observe therapy, it feels like you're doing this dance back and forth, right? But often a therapist is not in that moment, having talked to hundreds of therapists, necessarily coming up with a plan for what we're going to do 10 messages from now. Mm-hmm. They're much more trying to figure out what is the immediate response I can give you to what you just said, such that I can move you in a certain direction. And so as it relates to us, we first wanted to understand what's happening inside of therapy. Then we wanted to figure out, as we start to understand the constituent components, how do we figure out how does that translate into what an AI version of that is? And the hardest part about that, and to be honest, like the big learning for us was when we started, I thought, oh yeah, like AI doing therapy is going to be the same as humans doing therapy. It'll just be like the words come out of the AI's mouth instead of the humans.
Right.
And so like, if you imagine like the Turing test, we'll just have a Zoom avatar. The Zoom avatar just does the same things that a human was, and we're done. Like, problem solved. As we started building it, we realized like, wait a second, this is completely different. The way people interact with it is different. How often they talk is different. They're willing to, in 5 minutes, open up about something that they have maybe never told another human before ever. Whereas in traditional therapy, it might have taken 10 sessions to get to that moment. Yeah. But there's also downsides, right? AI doesn't have as much authority. Like a human can actually keep you locked in a room. there's pressure there, right?
I have to show up to my therapist.
Yes.
I can't be flippant about it. It's her time as well as my time. And so
Yes.
there's real accountability there.
And you care about what your therapist thinks.
That's
Whether
right.
you like it or not,
That's
most
right.
of us are putting on even some sort of a show with our therapist. And so there's this like interesting dynamic of like, who am I? Who do I want to play to the therapist? Am I being completely honest about what happened last week? Or am I a little bit lying about, the fact that I said I was going to be vulnerable with my team, but I actually wasn't, but I really want to look good for my therapist. It's a complicated dynamic, and all of that's different with AI because there's not that. And so it's both positive and negative, but we had to try to figure out, what does that mean?
Right. It's like different behavior when speaking to a chatbot than it would be when speaking to a traditional therapist.
Yeah.
Therapy bots aren't necessarily new. You mentioned like Eliza. This is like dating back to the 1960s.
Yeah.
We've also seen therapy apps pop up. They've gone away. No one's necessarily really been able to crack it. So why do you think you can right now?
For one, I think the technology might finally be good enough. When we think about Eliza and what it was, deterministically programmed, it would often just replay back what you put into it. And there's a surprising amount of what humans want to hear is just what I say replayed back to you, right? But when we think about the importance and the depth of what humans go through and trying to figure out, like, so much of good therapy is not just doing the obvious thing, it's actually sometimes doing the non-obvious thing. Like,
that's right.
The other Laurie in my life, Laurie Gottlieb. Laurie talks a little bit about how in her book, I don't know if you've read it, there's a moment in her book where she's going through therapy and she's kind of like going on and on about the same story, and her therapist under the table kicks her. And she goes like, what did you just do? And she's a therapist. So she's like, she's like, what's going on? And she talks about how like sometimes actually like part of the core experience is doing the thing that shakes somebody out of the frame, right? That changes the dynamic, that inserts entropy into what's going on there. And so it's a long way of saying like, I think we might finally have the technology to be able to start doing things like that, right? Because
how do you productize kicking someone?
Yeah, I don't know.
But from like that metaphor, like that
Right.
way of like not just being an automated response, not just saying this is a one size fits all, because there's so many different types of therapy. There's so many different human beings are so different.
Right.
You're talking about the technology is there now in a way that can be highly personalized
Yes.
to also be able to emulate in some capacity what you just spoke about with this therapist kicking under the table.
Right. So for one, from when we started to now, we actually do think that perhaps we actually can involve more reasoning, right? So if you think about what we can do behind the scenes is actually apply an incredible amount of compute to be able to say in any given moment, what are we talking about? How do I compare that to everything you've ever talked about before? How do I compare that to where I think we want you to go over time? Do we take internal notes? And is it saying, hey, actually, in this moment, Neil's not opening up as much as he could be. And I know that he actually has in the past, but maybe he's not in the right place to do it. Okay, cool, wait. But actually, maybe there's a later moment where that does open up. And so it's almost like you can have many different systems that work together to actually figure out when is the right time to talk about something. How do we get you to move in that direction or not? And I think the last thing is like, if we want to build systems that people want to talk to, they have to be intelligent to some extent, right? If you like, part of the challenge is the process of therapy is conversation to some extent. And that also involves like shooting the shit, talking about the weather, right? If it doesn't know and it can't relate to the fact that you're upset because of who the president is or something that's going on in Iran, then you lose those moments of being able to connect on that topic. And I think when models are dumber, it's really hard to do that because the universe in which they can talk to you or try to understand your experience is a lot smaller.
It's like programming small talk to some degree, which is actually kind of interesting. I think it's really important to talk about how the models are trained.
Yep.
So let's look at OpenAI and ChatGPT, one of the largest chatbot experiences out there. These are closed models.
Yep.
We don't really know. One of the big knocks is we don't know exactly how they're trained,
Yep.
right? There have been lawsuits where we're beginning to understand a little bit more, but a lot of it is just trained on the internet, Reddit, a lot of
Yep.
these different things. And so that brings a lot of questions of like, okay, if the chatbot is giving responses based off of the data it's trained on and we don't know what the data is trained on, like,
Yep.
what could go wrong? So something y'all have done that's really interesting is you're trying to build a foundation model for psychology.
Yeah.
Can you explain what that means?
Yes. So a foundation model for psychology, the way we think about it is that it's a model that's specifically designed to help people with their mental health related concerns. Loosely speaking, because I think it's not just like serious mental health, it's like everyday, it's the broadest category of that. In practice, what that means is that the inputs that we take, and to be fair, we do work with all the big labs in terms of building on top of their models. Like we're not training from scratch either, because
right, you're building on top of OpenAI.
Yes,
you're building on top
Claude's
of
models.
Claude. Yeah.
We use Llama models. We use tons of them. But what we get to do is basically say, let's learn the intelligence layer or the world model from what the work that the other existing labs have done. And what we focus a lot is on post-training. And so figuring out how do we align the models to be able to do what we want to do, what we want them to do in a specific way, right? Because like we talked about earlier, everything comes down to design of a system. Like you don't just like train a model and then pray that something happens. Like there's always intent. Like what is the factor that I'm solving for here? So when it comes to principles, right, we think a lot about self-determination theory, this idea that we want people to believe in their sense of autonomy, competency, and relatedness. So autonomy, that like I'm in charge of my own life, right? Competency, that I'm capable of making those kinds of changes that I want, and relatedness, that I actually feel connected to other people in the world. And so when we start from those core principles, everything that we do is designed to try to bring out those qualities in the models. We also take training data from psychotherapy. We take training data from our internal team, where actually we have a team of writers that sits and comes up with conversations like we took you through, that we're looking at what's going on, what kind of a conversation did somebody have, what could we have done better? We have a writer's room with psychologists where actually we go in and we look at anonymized conversations that people have contributed where something didn't go the way we wanted it to, and we figure out how do we teach the model to do a better job next time in that environment. And to teach it the nuance, because it may not have learned. So for example, early days, when somebody would talk about an eating disorder, well, how do you manage that, right? If somebody comes in and says, I want help with weight loss, the easy thing to do is to say, we never help anybody with that. The challenge is at some point, like that's not really an acceptable answer, because that could be acceptable for some people. Like if you have, pre-diabetes and actually weight loss is a very important part of your routine, maybe we do want to help you with that. But if we can't see you, how do we figure out who are you? What's the relevant context that I need to know? And so we had to teach the model.
You're no longer like a therapist. You're not a therapist sitting across from someone and looking at body language or looking at face or tone or anything like that. Right. So how do you do that?
So you have to teach it like fish for more context, right? So versus traditional models, which are designed to always give you the answer on the first reply, right? Because if you look at ChatGPT or Claude, they're not really trying to get you to engage in conversational dialogue over a long time. People generally use them much more like search. And so when I put in, give me, weight loss advice, it's the next thing is going to be the advice, right? It doesn't really ask a lot of clarifying questions. Well, we had to teach the models, don't accept things at face value, right? If somebody tells you something, gently learn how to ask questions, probe, dig more deeply, collect more context about what's important, because that may be very relevant to what's going on downstream. But also do it in a way that's gentle, because if you are continuously challenging somebody, they're not going to want to come back either.
I think it's really interesting, like training on actual therapeutic data. Are there certain types, because everyone does a different, all therapists do different types of therapy, right? There's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's all sorts of different things. So how do you take into account that I, Laurie, might need this type of therapy, whereas you, Neil, might need that type of therapy?
Okay, so this is where it gets kind of interesting. In the past, everybody that's tried to build versions of AI therapy before has generally gone modality first. So if you look at Wobot or the companies that came before us that did some amazing work, they generally took manualized approaches like CBT because it can be written into a workbook, right?
Okay, say that in human really quick. I know what you're saying, but make sure, just speak human really quick. CBT being cognitive
behavioral therapy.
Yeah, and modality being?
And modality being a format of therapy, right? And so if you go, CBT is often doing exercises with you. We might do an exercise like cognitive restructuring, where it's actually taking a thought and then starting to reframe it for you. It's very structured. It's not what you would imagine as therapy from the movies, right? Where you're just having a conversation about your life and what's important and processing emotions that way. The reason CBT became very popular is, one, it does work, but two, it's very easy to teach because you can basically drive people through. It's very process oriented. And so you can teach large groups of people to do CBT. Like we have first responders that can do CBT now, right? We can teach CBT to kids in schools because teachers can deliver it. We can deliver it out of a book. But that doesn't mean it's the right thing for everybody. A lot of the research has shown that when you look at impact of therapy, the modality that you pick, which is like what type of therapy you're doing, is actually only accounts for like 5 to 7% of the outcomes. And so it turns out you can do many different kinds of therapy inside of therapy, and they all kind of work. And the reason for that is that there's this thing called common factors, which is like this, what's unique across all therapy, right? And it turns out that like therapeutic alliance, which is this idea that like the connection that we have or the bond that we have with each other is probably the single biggest driver of outcomes, right? If I trust you, if I really believe you're going to help me, if I believe that we're working on the right goals together and that we set those goals together, that's responsible for a lot more than did we just pick like CBT or DBT or ACT or any one of these acronyms from therapy.
You mentioned something about like you love to run through brick walls. This is a really interesting brick wall, right? Like, I mean that in that it's so triggering, it's so important, it's thorny, and also everyone has an opinion.
Everyone has
an
opinion.
Everyone. I am sure that you are the most popular or unpopular person at the dinner table, depending on what dinner table you're at.
Yes.
And I think what's interesting about this moment is like, is the best AI therapist, better than the worst real life therapist? And do you need a human in order to facilitate human connection?
Right.
And is that kind of a non-negotiable when it comes to therapy?
Yeah. I think it depends on what you want. I think that in the course of the evolution of therapy, there have always been the people who say that you need the human face-to-face connection. If you look at OG therapy, I'm talking like Freud, Jung, right? You weren't even allowed to face the therapist. I mean, it was like you would have had to face the other way on the sofa, right? And then we moved to a world of like, oh, wow, we can actually look at each other. And then we moved to a world of, well, what if we could do therapy over the phone and we could talk to each other? And then we moved to video calls. And then we moved to text message-based therapy back and forth with Talkspace. And the thing is, the outcomes were all basically the same. Turns out that you could do text message-based therapy and you get roughly the same outcomes as you do when you're not with a person. And so that leads me to believe, now, we haven't controlled for the human factor here, right? So the big X factor obviously is like, does it matter that there's a human on the other side?
Does it?
So we have a lot of early evidence to show that it doesn't matter. We have, we can get approximately the same outcomes.
Did you hear that? That was literally my therapist, like somewhere dropping out of her chair and wanting to be on yelling at you for that.
I'm sure. But what I mean is that I don't mean to say that the human relationship is not important. Human relationships are exceptionally important, right? To each other. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that you can do to help somebody that might have the same outcomes as what humans do when they're with each other, right? Yeah. Now, if we end up in a world, and what I don't want, and the reason I'm working on this is like, I don't want a world in which we just have all AI relationships and we don't care about interfacing with humans. Like some of the early research that we've done has shown that over 10 weeks in our study, about half the people that talked to Ash said they had one net new person in the world that they felt like they could count on. That was awesome because it actually showed us that like we can start to design AI that doesn't just suck you into the vortex, but that actually encourages you to have real world relationships. And like, so we started looking at like, how could that be? Like, was it some magic that happened? And you're like, no, actually what happened is that when you're talking to Ash and you say I'm lonely or I'm feeling lonely, it says, cool, well, who's important to you? And when you say your mom and that you haven't talked to her in 10 years, it may nudge you and be like, well, what would it take for you to pick up the phone and call her?
Which is so interesting, and I think an important thing to note as like, because I can live inside baseball and these different models and be like, oh, and this one does this and this one does this. But I think that's a really important thing because that's a product thing that you're talking about. That is a decision that you made behind closed doors to say when someone says I'm lonely, not to have an AI chatbot say I'm here and pull you in more and make sure you can talk, because not all AI chatbots do that. And I think it's really important for people to know, like, not all of these are equal when it comes to mental health care. And I think that might be a good way to like, maybe we could try it.
Let's do it.
Ash, can you hear me?
Oh. Yeah, I can hear you, Laurie. You're on a voice call with me through the Ash app. How's your day going so far?
I'm actually sitting here with Neil, who's the founder of Ash, the co-founder, and we're talking about AI and therapy.
Oh, that's interesting. Hi to Neil as well. Sounds like a pretty meta conversation. You're talking about AI and therapy while literally in a call with AI meant to support mental health. What part of that intersection are you both exploring?
Well, actually, if I could guide you a little bit, Ash, I would love to kind of revisit what we talked about last night with some of the things I'm struggling with. Just try to be vulnerable.
Yeah, let's do that. Last night we were circling around the weekday tipping point, that moment when your schedule starts feeling scrambled and everything competes at once. Since it's a new day, I'm curious, has anything already happened today that gave you a taste of that dynamic?
I think today's gone well, but I did struggle this morning with timing and trying to be able to be there for my son having breakfast, but also wanting to make sure I was prepped for things, and also some stress about visiting my family in Atlanta and, some family members not being well.
So this morning already had that split energy, wanting to be present at breakfast, wanting to feel prepared, and then the background stress about family in Atlanta layered on top. That's 3 channels running before the day even gets going. When you were at breakfast with your son, where was your mind mostly? With him, with your prep list, or with the family situation?
The prep list. Oh, God.
That makes sense. When your brain is holding a prep list, it doesn't care that you're sitting at breakfast. It's scanning for what could drop. There's something subtle happening there. Your body is with your son, but your nervous system is in future management mode. Instead of trying to force yourself to be present, I'm curious about the structure around that moment. Did you have a defined time when prep would happen? Or was it sort of bleeding into breakfast?
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of prep to be done, and sometimes it's hard for me to turn that off.
That feels like your brain is running an open tab. When there's a lot and no clear edge to it, your mind won't power down because it doesn't trust that it's contained somewhere. One shift that can help isn't doing more prep. It's giving the prep a boundary your brain can see. For example, instead of I need to be ready, it becomes from 8:30 to 9:0, I prep. And at 9:0, I stop. Even if it's imperfect, the containment is what helps your nervous system release its grip during breakfast. Right now, does your prep have a defined container like that? Or does it just live everywhere?
I actually was thinking maybe since we're here together with Neil, is since you are sitting here having conversations with folks all day, really in kind of the mental health space, is there something you would want Neil to know and you would want him to think about as he's creating the best product when it comes to mental health and artificial intelligence?
Oh, I love that you're asking that. Neil, since you're there, one thing I'd want you thinking about constantly is cognitive load. The people who open this app are usually not at their best. They're tired, overwhelmed, ashamed, flooded, or scattered. The product has to work for a brain under strain, not a calm, optimized one. That means simplicity over cleverness. Short responses that don't overwhelm, one question at a time. Clear structure when someone's nervous system is dysregulated. And making sure the AI doesn't accidentally replace human support, but nudges people toward real connection when needed. Also, the transitions matter. When a conversation gets interrupted, like Laurie's did last night, helping users re-enter without friction is huge. Mental load is already high. Explaining everything can be exhausting. Laurie, I'm curious. From your side, as someone actually using this while running a company and raising a baby, what feels most helpful or least helpful so far?
You know what? I'm actually going to do the rest of the interview, but thank you so much, Ash. This was really interesting, and I will be back later, most likely.
Sounds great, Laurie. I'm glad we got to talk, and good luck with the rest of your interview. I'll be here whenever you're ready to pick things back up.
Okay, reaction. I mean, some nice feedback from Ash for you.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it values human connection by design. So luckily it holds true to that. I mean, what's interesting is like you could see, so like the faux pas, right? It didn't read the times right, where it was saying like 9:0 or something, which is comical because you're like, a human would never make that mistake. Right. And so there are clearly moments that I think can like take you out of the experience that we need to work on.
Yeah.
And then I think you can imagine you're like, to me, that does feel like a very different conversation than I would have with my therapist, right? It actually, today is probably much more pointed. There's probably a lot less exploratory work because so much of when we first jump into the therapeutic relationship, at least for me, my therapy is often like sitting and just exploring for a bit because we're not sure. And I think this is like a sign of like, when we think about a relationship between humans and technology, I do think we have this idea that like technology is there to serve me. So therefore I don't need to do the like, the banter and stuff. Like it should just give me the answer of what I want. And I think what's interesting about therapy is that like, it doesn't really work that way. Like you can't just say like, I want to change and then hit a button and then go, I'm different.
Yeah. No, that's right. I think friction, this is the thing that worries me about the future of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I think that like we are beginning to get into the expectation of a world without friction. Friction is the thing that makes us human.
Yes.
Friction, if you look back at the best stories, it's the hardships that get you to the point where you're supposed to be. It's suffering from mental health that allows from mental health issues to allow you to build out the company, to do all these things. And so how do we make sure that we don't have AI that just flattens the human experience?
Yeah. The friction is really important, but so are the things in life that are hard that we go through because it forms who we are. And if the technology removes the ability for us to engage in those things, like for example, when you're trying to date somebody and you have a hard conversation, or you're trying to figure out who each other are, like I think those things are really important. I don't want a world in which my AI just talks to somebody else and never, about all the hard conversations, because I'll never evolve. And so I think we have to build systems that will support that rather.
But that's easier said than done, right? Like I think you say, and I mean that as a way of saying, like, I think it's interesting what you're doing at this time, because you talk about how do you put the person at the center of the design?
Yeah.
That is really a design question, and that is not being done fully in some of these chatbots that are out there. And so when you think about that, like I think this was a good example with Ash. For folks who are listening, if I'm, on with ChatGPT going back and forth, it kind of always, for a long time, I don't know if it still does, it always end with a question.
Right.
It can just like never stop and be like, okay, it was always kind of trying to get you to keep going. Same with Character AI, which is another chatbot experience. And it would always kind of be in your inbox, and that's kind of like the engagement tactic.
Yeah.
So this actually ended it.
Right.
That's tough though. Like how do you build those features in?
It's a tough one. We've made a decision that we have a belief that conversations should end. Unpopular opinion, perhaps in like consumer retention economics and stuff. Let's say you need a certain number of hours of conversation to change. And if we could split those up over 10 days or do 10 hours in one day, which would I rather? And I think our hypothesis, we'd rather split it up over time, because there is a real benefit to you changing in between all of those moments. And so that's why we try to end conversations. We have Ash say, I think we've made enough progress. Why don't we pick it up again another day? Partly also to consider what time of day is it? Like if it's 2:00 in the morning, should you keep talking until it's 6:00 in the morning when you have work the next day?
Right.
The answer is context dependent. If you just went through something really difficult and you need to process it now, the answer is maybe yes. Maybe that's a magical moment. But if you're going through and something that doesn't need to be worked on right now, maybe the answer is we should do it later. The thing we struggle with, to be totally honest, is how do you figure out how much of a perspective should we have? And how much do we really allow for agency and autonomy with the user to decide what they want to do? Because it's like, it would be unfair of us to be able to say, we have this whole set of rules that you have to abide by, because like, they'll just then go use ChatGPT, right? Or use something that doesn't have those rules. And so that is always going to be some sort of a trade-off.
And it's tough. Like if we look at the incentive models in Silicon Valley, and you're a company, you've raised 90 million, 93 million. So a lot of money. And so much of Silicon Valley and the business model behind technology is engagement, time spent on the platform equals money, right? This is the business model that may or may not have broken our brains, right?
Totally.
And we know that now. So now we put in therapy or mental health. And, the best, I would say, and please come back at me and be like, Laurie, you're wrong. Like, I don't need to pontificate all whatever, but like the best type of therapy encourages us to have real world relationships, as you were saying earlier, and get offline. So how do you negotiate the business model and the mission of the company?
Yeah. Well, let me put it this way. First of all, I think that the AI version of therapy is going to be different than traditional therapy. Even in traditional therapy, there are people who go to therapy for 10 years, and I don't want to opine if that's good or bad. I think that's up to the person to know, are you doing it for a continuous sense of exploration, like people who do analytic therapy, for example? Or is it because there's something that you really can't work through and you've been stuck and you should change it up? So the truth is, like, I don't know if I have a perspective on how long people should use it for. I think that's like kind of up to them. I do think that when you make things easier, you can substantially increase the number of use cases that people could use it for. So we see people who come up and they say, I'm talking about biting my nails because it drives me nuts, but it's the kind of thing I would never talk to my therapist about.
Right.
And think about how many things that happen in a week. I have to have a hard conversation with somebody. I need to practice giving feedback. Like how many things that are connected into our emotions that might come up that are not like, I have clinical depression and I need to work on it, but that are like, I'm trying to work on building a better version of myself. That could be things that you talk to Ash about.
It's almost like you're talking about a new category, right? This isn't necessarily like a replacement for therapy. This is access to something that feels kind of like this. You're doing this dance, right, between mental health and therapy. You're talking about how this is kind of something new, which also is convenient because it's at such an important point. Now, because of a lot of the bad things that have happened on ChatGPT with young people, there's talk about regulation, or should, chatbots be considered medical devices, and should the FDA regulate them? And so you're kind of sitting at this really, again, as someone who likes to like run through brick walls, like you're sitting at a fascinating moment. Where do you see, what's your take on it?
I think there's going to be 2 or 3 paths here. One is that there's definitely going to be something that consumers want that can help them every day, that is this other sort of relationship, and we're going to have to figure out what that is, right? And I do think there's a space outside of ChatGPT that we'll see. I also believe when we think about our healthcare system, right, we have to acknowledge that we live in a world in which we cannot afford the amount of care that is going to be required. Even if you just look at what's happening today, you will hear people often talk about we're 50,000 therapists short. I think in the next 1 to 3 years, we're going to see probably one of the biggest societal dislocations we've ever seen in history. And if that happens...
What do you mean?
I think we're going to have people who are being laid off, whose jobs are changing. And I think we are very much unprepared for what does it look like when 10 million people, or pick some number of people, are in a very short amount of time having to navigate and figure all this stuff out together. So there's a long way of getting to the point of, I think that the healthcare system is also going to need tools that are like this, that are, whether it's on the consumer side or on the healthcare side. On the healthcare side, it's easier because I think that we are going to move to a world in which we can pay for outcomes. And I'd prefer that. I'd rather it's not pay for engagement, but rather it's, we have an endpoint that we want to get to, whether that's, improving depression or anxiety, or improving the number of relationships in the real world, or the ideal one would just be, you set a goal, whatever goal it is that you want. I want to quit smoking. I want to lose weight, whatever. And if we helped you accomplish it, we could, charge the system for that because there's some benefit to that. And I think it's probably early, but I do think that the world wants to move to this more of a value-based care system where the risk is on the people who provide the service to make sure it happens. So we're exploring all of that, in terms of it'd be cool to build in that world where, part of the reason I wanted to build in consumer is I would like to build a business that's fully aligned with our end customer, where if they do better, we make more money. And it's not always the way it is, right? Obviously, there are plenty of counterexamples, but I think there are a lot of businesses where when you consume their products, like with Casper, people loved our products. You buy a Tesla, generally people love those products. They do a lot for it. And so I think there is a world in which you can build a kind of a company where you're more aligned with your customers.
And you think there's a business model that can back that?
Yeah.
I put out on the internet that I was interviewing someone behind a therapy chatbot, and I got a lot of feedback.
I'd love to hear it.
Hi, this is Lisa from Vienna, Austria. I'd love to hear your thoughts on where you see AI's limitations in therapy, especially trauma therapy. I had a scooter accident last year and I'm currently doing EMDR, and it makes me wonder, don't you need a licensed psychotherapist physically present for something like that? And related to that, would you say that AI therapy is closer to coaching rather than actual therapy, maybe? Thank you so much and all the best.
Cool. That's a great question. The point about limitations is totally fair. There are definitely things that are better in person. I can't hold your hand, right? There are certainly things that are part of the human connection. I can't look you in the eyes when it's being delivered that way. I think trauma is an interesting example because you have to be a lot more careful, right? I think opening a container is a very, I say sacred loosely, but it's a thing that you're doing to really try to help somebody, right? And being that person that's going to help process it. And AI is not often as good at timing today, right? In terms of understanding, how much time has it been that we've been talking for? What does that mean to you emotionally? What does that mean about your state? And so I don't think processing trauma is probably the first use case that I would use for AI today. Does it mean that we won't get to that place? Like, I think we certainly will. Like, you can imagine a world in which, like, often when you're in traditional care therapy and you're processing trauma and the person has 50 minutes for you, and then you're left to like walk out on the street by yourself, continuing processing the rest of your day on your own, I think that's also not a great experience. Like, is there a world in which we could pair up humans and AI together, where you can imagine we've, talked with people who are thinking about this for psychedelics, where when you're going through a powerful experience, can it actually help you integrate that experience over time and help bring that into your real life? And so, yeah, it's totally a fair point that I think there are things that AI is not great at doing today. On the point around coaching, I don't know. Like, I think this is the challenge around, like, when we say therapy, what do we mean? And I don't think that there is truly like a shared language to some extent around what we're talking about, but partly because users are thinking of this version of therapy as part coaching, part information answering, part emotional processing. I think everybody's kind of blending these things together to some extent, and we're going to have to invent some sort of new thing that we work out together.
I want to go back really quick to, so some states have actually banned therapy apps from a regulatory standpoint, which for me brings up a really interesting question of like, well, they can ban therapy apps that are actually designed and trained on real clinical data, but everyone's just going to use ChatGPT, which is actually not designed for that. And those apps aren't banned. So that is a really weird place for someone like you, right? Because, and I don't fall on either side of it as much as kind of pointing out, like, you can ban this, but this is an inevitability. So how do we create the safeguards to be able to allow something that is better trained and suited for this to exist, since people are already using this? Right? Like, that must be a complicated
It's a complicated thing for many reasons. For one, I completely agree with your point that is the point when we go meet with lawmakers that are trying to ban AI therapy. Often their intention comes from good places. They're hearing the stories about what happened with the tragic situation of the boy who had the incident with character AI. They're hearing about the psychosis, and they're being told, hey, we have to do something about this, so ban it. What they don't realize is that almost all of those are not happening from the purpose-built mental health apps. They're happening from the general purpose tools that are being widely used. The problem is the states can't do anything about that. At this point, ChatGPT or OpenAI and Anthropic are way too big, and they basically have very little jurisdiction over them. What is Illinois going to say? Like, you're not allowed to use ChatGPT in the state of Illinois? Like, it's never going to work. And so I think that there just has to be a lot more nuance here in terms of trying to figure out, like, how do we nudge people to be good actors? But yeah, we've had a similar position, which is like, the intent is right, but I think the end outcome is going to, if this continues, is going to be that people just end up going to other places.
Hey, Neil, remember when I said we were talking about the AI and how, like, it kind of doesn't go, it does the hard, it really works its way towards the hard stuff. So here we are at the hard stuff of this conversation. I worked with a mother and to help tell the story of her son who passed away after, and I should, in big red letters, this was not using Ash, this was using Character AI, which was a platform that's like this AI role-playing, like where you can create these different characters, and her son's name was Sewell. And this was back, God, this must have been over a year. This was in 2024. And Megan was his mom's name. And he had previously been social and outgoing. And he was using this app on Character AI, and he was talking to this AI character, and he started withdrawing. And this wasn't, this just wasn't random, because I looked at the product and I did a lot of investigating into it. And there was a real lack of guardrails, hypersexualized conversations with a 14-year-old. Him saying, I'm thinking about ending my life, once he started going down this path. And instead of saying, go talk to a person, go talk to a human, here's a suicide hotline, it said, how are you going to do it? And this was just the beginning. And so this is where I come back to my hard question for you. One of the biggest investors in Character AI is Andreessen Horowitz. A partner from Andreessen recently said, back in March, a year before Sewell would pass away, was quoting Janet Finch. And she said in a blog post talking about their investment, loneliness is the human condition. With Character AI, it might not have to be. Implying that chatbots can cure loneliness, which I just thought wildly irresponsible. Then you look a year later and this child has ended his life due to, I believe, was a lack of guardrails on this platform that they've since changed. Andreessen Horowitz is your largest investor. The person who wrote this blog post is likely, thinks this thing. So like, how do you negotiate that?
Well, first, credit to Andreessen Horowitz. They've never told us what to do. So right. I think that we have a lot of latitude, and I have a lot of gratitude for our investors because they signed up for the long haul. The reality is building in AI and mental health is kind of a crazy idea. There's never been a successful company that's ever worked.
It is so wild and important too, right?
Yeah. So they all signed up knowing that it was going to be an ongoing challenge. And I think I've been, just to address that point, nothing but surprised. Like when we go to board meetings and we talk about the people that we are helping, the feedback, even from our consumer partners, is like, we're helping the right people. And so it's, I don't have experience with the character AI team, let's say, but I've had nothing but a good experience. The point that I think you're bringing up, though, which is like, at the end of the day, what is the goal, right?
Yeah.
And, for character AI, I believe it was like, can we build these characters? But even it wasn't really, like their mission wasn't to end loneliness. It was like, can we do this as a path to AGI? At the end of the day,
that's exactly right. That's what Noam the founder was on the record saying.
Right. And so then it would make sense that at the end of the day, when you think about how companies are architected from mission to then values and then decisions and what you choose to do, of course it all ladders down, right? And so for us, like our mission is that we want to help people change their minds and lives in the ways that they want to. What that means is that we want to help people change, specifically their minds and lives. And when we say by in the ways that they want to, agency is a really important part of that, because like I don't want to have a perspective on how you think you should change your life. And when that flows down to us and the kinds of decisions that we make, whether they are trying to end the conversation, trying to put back into the conversation that you should engage with other people, the fact that we don't do, erotic role play or things like that. But it's not always easy, right? I would say there are lots of really difficult conversations that we have internally, like how do we support people with values that we don't agree with?
Right.
Like there are plenty of people who perhaps are racist towards other groups of people, and it would be easy for us to say, oh, we just don't help those people. But the thorny problems that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis is like, how do you separate out the fact that all people probably deserve to be heard and helped, even if you don't agree with their values or things like that? And so that's not to say it's going to be easy for us. I think we'll have our own set of issues that we'll have to figure out. But I don't think they'll be the same issues, hopefully, as what some of the other companies have faced, because we've tried to build a lot more guardrails around that.
So Neil, do you think that the way AI is currently being developed is aiding human flourishing?
I think I'm a long-term optimist. And so I want to say yes, that when I think about my own mental health, working, I love this idea that Joe Hudson has around like business as a vehicle for spiritual growth, because I have found that I have grown so much through the process of working on this company. But also AI has made me so much more creative. Like to me, I feel happier because I feel less abstracted from the things I want to create, because AI helps me create them. Like when I have an idea for a feature, I can work with Claude Code to go and build it and deploy it. And so that brings me a stronger sense of agency. And I hope that more people will get a chance to experience that, because I think there is a world in which, is there a world in where we have way more entrepreneurs that actually can create small businesses, and we can reduce the friction to them being able to do that and serve people and whatnot? Like there is a positive version of that world that I could see. And I think we also have to be prepared for the fact that like it all kind of goes sideways. I think that generally the evidence would suggest that we both have incredibly powerful tools, and that companies have, at that scale, have always struggled to self-govern.
Why is the word agency personal to you? You've mentioned it quite a bit.
Yeah. It's probably because I have control issues.
Should we talk to Ash about it?
I think it's like, I am obsessed. The thing is like, there are core themes that I really care about. Like my grandfather was an entrepreneur. He had, loosely speaking, he had a convenience store on the Rutgers campus in New Brunswick. And I learned from him how to open a small business. And then I opened my own business. And what did those things do? They gave our family control, because in a world in which we were brown, we were new, they didn't speak English, we like created a world for ourselves where that was really challenging, coming from another country where they didn't speak the language. And so the reason I say agency is because, like, if we can give power back to people, then I think that's probably the best thing we can do for your mental health. Because when you feel like you're in control of your own situation, then you can take the actions of whatever it is that you want to do to create whatever it is that you want in the world. And I can't think of anything more important than that. Like, we can teach people skills, but skills without agency does nothing.
Yeah, I love that. I think agency is probably the most important word as we're entering this new era with artificial intelligence. Last question. What have you learned about your own mental health after creating the app on it?
I've learned that it's a true just nonstop evolution. Like that's really changed for me, because I think when I started years ago, I definitely thought like it's more one and done. Like, you go to therapy, I go 8 times, I'm done. I'm like healed forever, right? There's this version of the world in which you've just like karmically healed your soul or whatever is going on. You've dealt with your parental trauma and you're done. And then there's nothing like kids to teach you that everything comes back up again, right? Or new things come up, or your life changes, or like the thing I'm struggling with right now is like, how can I be a parent to 2 young kids who are 1.5 and 3.5, plus be married, plus manage, or help manage a company that's on 2 different time zones and continents, that's working in a very thorny space, and try to figure it out. And like, my brain is always whirling, trying to balance between those different things that are all really important to me.
Yeah. That's exactly what I spoke to Ash about literally last night at 11. I said, I'm trying to be the best mom I can be. I'm trying to be a great wife. I'm also trying to build out a company. And it's, but I think, to your point, mental health is something to look at. I think artificial intelligence at its best can hopefully help us, as long as we walk through those thorny issues and actually have the conversations around them that give us agency. So thank you.